Liz Eide. I am the pastor at Lutheran Church of Peace in Maplewood, Minnesota. I'm there as a redevelopment pastor. I've been there for just over 2 years.
I'm Bob Tron, and I've been a member for over 30 years.
So the challenge really as I came in was that they had gotten so small. They had just shrunk. They had lost 3/4 of the members of their congregation, and it wasn't necessarily due to any great rift or divide or tragedy or catastrophe that had happened.
Over an 8-year period, we went through it was 9 years. It was 8 pastors, of which 3 were called and 5 were interim. People asked us, so what was wrong? You must have this big conflict. Your church must have been a horrible place. And that wasn't true at all. Until the last pastor left, which happened at the end of 2016, we remained financially viable. But when that pastor left, we found ourselves without a direction.
They needed to make a decision about whether or not they would continue in ministry or whether it was time to close their doors.
Chair of the church council came to me and asked me to lead a team to answer 2 questions. Are we vital? And are we viable? So we put together a team of 7 of us, and we attacked both questions at the same time, and our answer was strongly, yes, we are vital. But on the financial side, we realized that we were not viable. The numbers just didn't work anymore. Didn't know where to go next. We were still feeling our way. The part that we didn't understand was how much help would be available through the synod. Fact of the matter is, there was a process and help available through the synod. And that really got us on the right track.
The ELCA came in, the St. Paul Area Synod came in. They had an amazing interim pastor at the time, and they checked everything out: the building, the finances, the heart of the community, the neighborhood around them, did a whole feasibility study, and decided that God was not done with them yet.
We conducted a mid-year stewardship campaign in 2017, which was in essence a referendum on, do we want to have a church? And we asked people to commit not only for the second half of 2017, but also to make their commitment for 2018. Although we didn't get enough to say that we were now viable, we got enough to say that there is certainly a spirit here. We have members who want this church to continue.
And so they applied for 2 grants, one from the ELCA and one from the St. Paul Area Synod. They received both. And so they called a full-time pastor, and I arrived in February of 2018.
I perhaps didn't understand how important that was to the synod and to the LCA office in Chicago, that we were able to internally demonstrate that we still wanted to have a church. It gave us confidence going forward, knowing that we had people who were willing to vote financially to keep the church going.
When I interviewed at LCP, it was clear from minute one that they understood the challenge in front of them. And the challenge was that we couldn't keep doing the same things. They had tried everything, every sales pitch, every gimmick, every church growth tactic, every strategy. They had tried to make confirmation better, Sunday school better, vacation Bible school better, worship better, and none of those things were working. So they understood really clearly that we had to actually do something different, that church really had to become something new. And maybe that new, we were all hoping would walk alongside of some of the old ways of being church. They weren't ready to give those up. Was what shape should church take today in our context, in our spot in the world, in our neighborhood? We signed up right away with the Synod's Year of Renewal process. Actually, they had already signed up before I started. Learned right away that the whole process is about listening. And so in the Year of Renewal, there are 3 great listenings: listening for God, listening to your community internally, and then listening outward to the community around you. So we embraced that wholeheartedly right away. And the first thing we did was the church council started reading through the book of Acts. And we took an entire year to read through every book, every chapter in the book of Acts. We took 30 minutes at the beginning of every council meeting to be in the Word together and to be praying together. We also shared faith stories right away with each other. And that helped us to get to a deeper place with one another really quickly. It also centered all of our work right in God's word and right in listening for God. It was all about, okay, God, we're here. We've heard this call. Now, what do you want to do with us? So it was really a spirit-led process right from the beginning. The second thing we did was started a listening campaign in the congregation. So I also started a week or two before the Lent started that year. And during Lent, we took on as part of our spiritual practice listening. So we were a team of 5 originally on the renewal team, and we trained up 15 other people to be listeners in the community and on how to do a one-to-one listening session.
We participated in a renewal cohort organized by the Synod, and that listening process was explained and demonstrated there. So we came out of there, I'll say, with enthusiasm. We saw how it could work. The process of listening is more than just sitting and listening. It's knowing how to ask questions. It's knowing how to draw people out. It's knowing how to keep conversation focused. We did role playing in that exercise on a Saturday morning, and those of us who did that then came back and demonstrated that same process to a larger cohort within our congregation, who then became the listeners. Listening is hard work. It's an administrative task of being trained, training others, dividing names among listeners, scheduling all of that, bringing listeners back together to sort out what we heard.
So we were worshiping somewhere between about around 75 people in worship at the time, and we did 85 listening sessions in that season of Lent in that year, 2018. And out of those listening sessions, all the listeners came, and we put on little Post-it notes of things that we'd heard. Nobody's names, just things that we heard. And we just put them up on the wall all over the place. And we left them up there for people to see and to add to if they wanted to, comments, things that were on their hearts. If they hadn't wanted to participate in a listening session, but they had things they wanted to add, that was great.
We used a lot of Post-it notes and wrote down things that we heard, thoughts and concepts, and turned them in. There was a distilling process that went on to take, 200 Post-it notes on a wall and turn that into a set of goals, objectives, values. I'm glad they did it, and they did it really well.
From that, we really started to hear, okay, what's important to people? Well, people were really concerned about their adult children that aren't involved in church anymore. People really had a longing on their hearts to have a church where everybody knew that they could belong, that their questions and their doubts, their wonderings belonged as much as people's faith and doctrines and creeds also belonged. They could coexist in the same space, and being in a place that really made that visible for people so that they would know that there was space for them. The other thing that was really on people's hearts was engaging the community around us and the neighborhoods around us, and wanting to be out in the world in a different way, and understanding that a lot of the people that we had hoped to be engaging, that were all named on these Post-it notes, were not inside the walls of the church, but they were outside the walls, in the neighborhoods, in our homes, in our friendships. All of those things started to help us generate ideas about how we might want to go forward. And so that started to give us shape and direction long before we got to any idea about what kinds of programs we might entertain. This was an enormous gift for me coming in as a brand new pastor in this context, but also for the whole congregation.
It was a safe environment to talk, an opportunity to get to know a couple of people that I thought I knew, and I didn't. There were things about them that I had no clue. It, I'll say, brought a deeper relationship between me and a couple of individuals.
One thing I heard repeatedly was, we are the happy remnant. We've been together for 30, 40 years. We all know each other so well. We've lived all these experiences. We're not going to hear anything new. To a person, every listener heard something new, heard stories from other members, people they call friends and family that they hadn't heard before. Never did we ask, what do you like or don't like about church? It was, where'd you grow up? What was that like? Who's in your family? What's on your heart in these days? What do you worry about? What are you rejoicing about, celebrating in these days in your life? And then it went from there, knowing what was on people's hearts, that started to lead us into where we felt the church was being called. It was learning a new way of being church and of living together. And so this listening process is something we have continued to replicate. It's something we feel is actually part of the new way of being church going forward, is deeply listening to one another and just receiving somebody else's story, not to respond to it, not to counter it, just to hear and listen. And wow, I mean, that really is a spiritual discipline. It's not something that our society is big on. It's not something we learn out in the world. And so it was really a learning process for us. A huge shift for us was thinking that there would be a program that might save us or that might take us back to 50 years ago, the way church was, and realizing that redevelopment and renewal is about being church in a different way, not doing church in a different way. And that left room for worship, the traditional worship services that really do still speak to a lot of people, to stand alongside new ways of worshiping that will speak to other people, and that both are okay, because it's not about doing, it's about being, and making space for the different ways that people might want to be the church in the world today. After we completed Lent, my first Lent, and all these listening sessions, people started saying, okay, Pastor, you've been here for a few months. Now we need to start Sunday school. You know, summer is coming. We have to do Vacation Bible School. You have to do that. We did these block parties. Should we do 1 or 3 or weekly this summer? How should we do all these things? And it just felt overwhelming. And I just said to people, we don't have to do these things. Let's figure out what works for us and not feel like we have to do all these things because this is what everybody else is doing and this is what church has looked like. And so we said, no, we're not going to start Sunday school. No, we're not going to do Vacation Bible School. And no, we're not going to do all these block parties this summer. We found a program called Messy Church. It comes out of the UK. And we just adapted it for our own purposes. And so on 10 Wednesday nights throughout the summer, we met on our south parking lot, and we were silly together, and we were serious together, and we shared faith together, and we shared a snack together. It was awesome. We didn't have a lot of neighbors who came. We did it outside so that neighbors might come. We invited a few friends. That part was largely not successful at all. But what it changed in us was deeply important. We came to a place where we could sit intergenerationally, talk about faith, be silly, be serious. We could see that worship could take a different shape, and that the pastor didn't always have to preach, and that we could actually live the sermon together. It was really beautiful, and it really started to shift some things in the way we are church together today. One of the things we don't talk about that often when we maybe think about innovation is the really non-glamorous, non-sexy part, structure of how the congregation exists. And one of the first things we started to talk about was the need for our council to shift its size, its structure, and its scope. And so over the course of that first year, we spent time looking at other councils. And one of the things we needed was just permission to say this could look a different way. And so once we felt like we had that, then the conversation opened up to, well, so what would work here, and how do we want to be organized? And so we shifted from a 12-member council to a 7-member council. We shifted from a council that was made up of all the chairs of the committees to a council that was largely consisted of members from the renewal team who transitioned into leadership roles on the council, so that the council really had shifted to a 30,000 foot view. We are the strategic, future, big idea, big scope thinkers. And we shifted to empowering our teams to start living into the mission and vision of the church in the ways that they see fit.
When I heard a conversation about having fewer members, my reaction was, well, yeah, it doesn't work. We have to have one person for stewardship, one for this, one for that, one for that. And I named off 12 positions, kind of breaking that silo of the worship committee goes right up to here, and there's a person representing worship on council, to a team of council members who are making decisions collectively. We get better decisions made because it's a smaller team that is focusing on core issues, not on all the minutia of day-to-day business, right? We have pushed decision-making in council to the teams, so we don't all have to sit around a room and decide whether or not we can afford $75 for new blades for the lawnmower. That was a really big part of our renewal. I think that set us up to being more flexible to making other decisions through renewal and through the pandemic.
That really freed a lot of leaders on the council to go and live ministry in deeper ways in other spaces, and then shifting the focus of the council so that their focus in the next 6 months was to name and claim our vision and our values. That was a really hard and really good process. It took us a little bit to get beyond naming all of the committees as our values. Every team wanted their team's work named in our values. So we came up with the traditional evangelism, worship, faith formation, all of these things. And it took conversation around, why are those things important? What about those things are meaningful to you? And getting behind those names to understand the heart of those pieces of ministry, to start being able to claim what we really valued within each of those. And so we came up with 5 values and a new vision statement and 4 priorities. And they've been invaluable in how we think about ministry today during this pandemic, especially.
I think the organ is a good thing to talk about for just a moment. It's been there forever. We spent a lot of money on it 22 years ago, having it. I think we retired the old one and got a new used one, if you will.
We have an amazing musician, and she is not an organist. She's a jazz musician. She has grown. Our choir has literally doubled. We also have a band, and we have a small choir space in the back of our sanctuary. We started wondering about what that space could look like if that organ wasn't there any longer. And we knew that if we were to really embrace using the organ again, we would need to make some significant repairs to it, money which we do not have, and money which we weren't interested in raising because we are focused in a different direction.
there are people, myself included, who said, but wait a minute, organ is a part of what I think of when I think of church on Sunday, particularly in the Lutheran Church, right? That's our tradition. But the fact is that as we think of the generation that we're trying to attract into our church, I should say generations, plural, the organ isn't what's going to bring them there. And that was a test of our willingness to change, I think. We all said, hey, we want to renew, and yeah, we're willing to change, we are. And then the question came, can we get rid of the organ? We collectively said yes, and it's because our future is not in the organ. Much as many of us like it and appreciate it, it's probably not our future.
One of the most amazing pieces about the story of how we ended up removing the organ from the sanctuary has to do with the way that people received that decision. We talked about it with all the stakeholders. We talked about it with our choir, with all of those who love music. And when we understood our why, and when they knew that we understood our why, and they agreed with our why of removing the organ, that was the end of the conversation. And so we announced it in worship one Sunday, and it was gone the next Sunday. And nobody batted an eyelash at the organ having been removed from the sanctuary. In fact, more people were excited about how we were going to be able to use this newfound space in our sanctuary for our growing music ministry programs. And that to me said, we've gotten somewhere in this redevelopment. And we have named our vision and our values, and they are our grounding, they are our foundation, and they're holding us steady. So our vision is that we are creating a brave community that includes the sure and the searching and the skeptical, spills outside the walls of the church, and shares the joy of Christ. We chose every word of that vision very carefully, and we had no idea how important every word of that vision statement was going to be. We had no idea that it was also God setting us up to not only be able to survive, but thrive during pandemic and social unrest in these days that we are currently experiencing. How that vision statement guides us now has really been incredible. That we have come back to that word brave so many times, and it has given us courage to say, we wanted to be a brave community. So, is this the brave right next step for us or not? That has helped us take braver steps, riskier steps. One of the things that we decided as we were heading towards summer, and it was becoming very clear that the pandemic was not going to be over by summer, it wasn't just going to fade away. As many churches started clamoring to open their doors and to make space for all the people to come back, we decided instead to go in the other direction and to take the brave step and to go small. And we created small church communities that worship together in households of about 10. 5 of them meet on Zoom on a Sunday morning. They check in with each other, they watch worship, and then they have conversation afterwards. And what we have discovered is that once again, we thought we had deep community, and we have found even deeper community in these small church communities. And we have found deep community that we don't want to let go of ever again.
The move to small church worship has been effective. My wife is one of the small church leaders, and our small group of, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 people, we've been faithful to each other. We've had some very good discussions. It's been part coffee hour almost as we gear into worship, opportunity to talk about prayer requests and what's going on in different families, and part just sitting back and listening to the worship. So it's been a good thing.
We started in the pandemic by recording our worship services. We have a videographer in the congregation who's graciously offered her services. And then we started worshiping via Zoom, which was great because we could all be together. And again, as we headed into summer, we weren't sure now what? Now what do we do? Do we continue to worship every Sunday via Zoom where we can all see each other's faces, or do we do something else? It was our musician who had this incredibly profound statement. I sort of like the facade of being together on Zoom. And that struck a chord for me and for all of us, that it really was the facade of being together. We wanted to be able to see each other and feel like we were together, but the truth was that we really weren't together. We weren't engaging community, which is one of our values, in the way and at the depth that we wanted to be doing that. And that launched us into these small church communities that have given us so much life, even during this time of pandemic. I left for vacation the day after we closed the building, and at the very beginning of the pandemic, our staff, without me around, which was awesome, and they created calling ministry. We had 15 people who stepped forward to call 6 people every week, once a week, to just check in with the entire community so that everybody had somebody calling to say, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need anything? How can we be praying for you? That was a really beautiful moment for me. I have loved that not only our staff, but our teams with this solid foundation of our vision and our values have felt empowered, have felt like they have tools, they have a framework from which they can say, hey, we think we want to move in this way. We think this will head us towards engaging community, or this is kind of a bold innovation, which is another of our values. We want to try it out. What do you think? And it's been just awesome to watch that happen in so many areas. Once we felt like we had our feet under us a little bit again during this pandemic, we decided we would get our teams all together. It's one of the things that we have been doing in the last year, is gathering all of our teams on all team nights so that they can hear what other teams are doing. We can be in the Word together. We can hear from the council vision and sort of all the things that they are thinking about as they look forward, and how we might do this ministry and this work together. And so we gathered all of our teams via Zoom, and we came up with a list of about 35 ideas, ways that we might engage our community during this time of pandemic. It was amazing. One of the things that was on the list was, hey, could we stand on people's driveways and do sort of caroling in July? And as we talked that through and all of the logistics of that, we realized that that probably wasn't going to work. And so then somebody else came up with an idea. Well, what if we make these signs that we put in people's yards that say, you are loved? Well, that went forward, and pretty soon somebody wrote a Thrivent grant, and we had professionally made signs that say, you are loved. And then they say Lutheran Church of Peace and give our website on the bottom of them. And that's it. And one Sunday after church, a whole bunch of people showed up. They got signs. They had addresses for all of our folks that are the most vulnerable and the most isolated. They also went to people who are newest to our community. From there, we have now said, okay, once you've had that sign in your yard for a couple of weeks, go put it in someone else's yard. Go put it somewhere else, anywhere. We don't care. We're not going to own this any longer. And it's been amazing. One couple had a neighbor drive by, and he honked his horn. They were out in their yard. He's honking his horn at them, and they're looking at him like, what's wrong with you? And he rolled down his window, and he said to them, hey, I just wanted you to know I was having the worst day. And then I drove by and saw that sign in your yard that says you are loved. And I just want you to know that it changed my entire day. Thank you. Thank you for having that message out there. As we started meeting in our small church communities, another moment where our leaders stepped up to create a new way of being. somebody realized that there were folks that were having a hard time navigating Zoom to meet in our small church communities via Zoom, or they didn't have any internet access at all. And so she said, hey, what if I started a small church community and we met in our fellowship hall, and we have a projector and a screen in that space, and we gathered there, and we'll follow all of the protocols. We'll wear masks, we'll sit 6 feet apart. And she said, I know some folks that I think I could call and invite. And so she invited some folks, and someone else said, oh, I'd like to, could I invite a few other people to come to that? And in about 2 days, we had 10 people, and we've kept it at 10 people for these small church communities. And now they meet in our fellowship hall, but it's a group that was isolated that now once a week gets to see people and worship together and be a part of the community in a new and deeper way.
A church in renewal needs strong leadership. Our renewal process, we had to have an amazing pastor. An amazing pastor is one who is providing challenge or velocity. You have to have energy moving forward. It has to be moving at a pace. If you try something new and it doesn't work, what are we going to try next? We can't wait 3 months to figure out what that is. And we are blessed right now with that amazing pastor.
We become really frustrated in mainline church today because we've been relegated to the sidelines. We used to be the heart of the community, the heart of society, and now we're out here on the edge, and it's a hard place to be. What we have realized is that there's a real easy way to get back into the center of the community. All you have to do is walk out your front door and start engaging that community. And pandemic has forced that upon us in a new way, and it's been a beautiful thing. We wanted to spill outside the walls of the church, and we are learning what that looks like. And as we continue to listen for God's guidance and leading, as we listen to one another and to the community around us, we're finding our way forward. As we've learned about bold innovation and embrace that as one of our values, I think the biggest piece of that is the listening, is learning to take that on not just as a task, but as a spiritual practice, and allowing your listening for God and God's direction. You're listening to one another, and you're listening to what the community around you, the neighborhoods around you really actually need and are interested in and have on their own hearts, and have that be what guides and leads you into your innovative practices.